Right. All right, welcome. I'm Angela Johnston, CEO and lead trainer here at Priority Kids. We're on a mission to eradicate childhood sexual abuse. And one of the ways that we do this is we advocate for best practices in youth serving organizations to keep kids safe. And one of the best practices that we advocate for is screening staff and volunteers. Now, this is something that I talk about with organizations all the time. And when I had an opportunity to speak with Helen Patterson of Life Works Well, I was really intrigued with her human resources and legal law background in employment law. So I'm really pleased to have Helen Patterson here for a conversation where we can take a bit of a deep dive into the best practice of screening staff and volunteers and find out a little bit more about how we can do this in an effective way, in a way that builds diversity, equity in the workplace. I know I've had a chance to speak with Helen a little bit about this, and she has certainly opened my eyes to some of the ways that this best practice can be performed in a way that builds our organizations and helps to keep kids safe. So welcome, Helen. I'd love it if you could just tell us a little bit about your work experience, and what you do with Life Works Well.
Oh, thank you, Angela. I'm so excited to be here, and I just so admire the work you're doing. It has been something that has been behind the scenes for so long, and it's really, I love your mission of trying to open up the dialogue about it and bring it to the, forth. So congratulations to you. I'm really pleased to be here and thankful. I have been in the HR employment law space for several years. I don't want to give it away, but a long time. So I started my career as a lawyer, doing a lot of litigation. So when we get to, risk management and avoiding liability, it's really important. And then I began to get involved with employment law and human rights as a lawyer, as in-house counsel for a retail organization, and eventually shifted my career into the human resources field using that background, managing harassment cases, promoting equitable workplaces. So I've done a lot of work in the area of just making work better. So I have been a consultant, but I've also been in and out of corporate roles. And my Life Works Well consultancy started actually after my second mat leave. And it took a long time to have my son. So I wanted to spend more time with my daughter, who was 6 or 7 at the time, and be home. And this was a way I could do that, but continue to make the workplace better. And so I help scaling businesses, so mostly smaller companies, nonprofits or for-profit, but I help them create high-performance, heart-centered cultures. And it's all about bringing that humanity back into the workplace from throughout the entire employee experience. So from hiring, which we're going to talk a little bit about the best practices today, right through to when you exit an employee. And when you talk about safety, I think especially in these youth serving organizations or any of the nonprofits where there's volunteers and there are vulnerable people, it's so important to create that safe space. And we're talking about not only physical, but psychological safety, which leads to inclusion and things like that. So we're going to have a great conversation today. Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but just in your introduction, I'm reminded of my enthusiasm for having a conversation with you because, in hearing your legal background and expertise and on the human resources side, and, as we know, we came into this conversation, or I came into this conversation looking for some of the legalities around doing reference checks. What can we ask people? What's not appropriate to ask people? How can we evaluate staff and volunteers in a way that is ethical, moral, legal? And I just I loved how you were able to show me that that's really, kind of like a step 3 or step 4 out of the whole process. And so it's really nice to see, how all of the practices that you are going to tell us about lead to a place where we're able to do that screening effectively. So I don't know if you have more that you want to talk about, or if we can dive back into sort of like, so where I came from was, I want to know about this screening process, but what you have shown me is that it starts before that.
Exactly. So one of the things I recommend, and the work that I do, I start with an HR, what I call an HR health assessment. Because to me, being a healthy workplace is also about all of those components, right? People are excited to come, they're energetic, they feel safe, as I said, physically and mentally. So you need to kind of take a step back. And most organizations like you've worked on what your mission is, what your vision is for the organization, and ideally what your values are, or virtues, or whatever you want to call them. What are your guiding behaviors? So you do need to kind of spend some time as leaders and CEO and the leadership team to get that in a good place first. So your mission, vision, values, because that drives everything that you do. It will drive your employee policies. It will drive your hiring practices. And so one of the other things I do, I'm the author of and lead editor of Employment Policies That Work, which is a publication by Thomson Reuters. And so we look at all of those best practices, and including codes of conduct, things like that. So you do need to take a step back. And part of that, what I do is a gap analysis. And often people don't even have their job descriptions. So we'll talk about that. So before you're even going to get into the interview process, you have to post a job, right? Where are you posting? All of those things, but really looking at how are you going to describe it? How are you going to describe it? And are you going to say within it, we create a safe space, we accommodate difference, we accommodate your needs if you have a disability through the process. So all of those have to also go in your posting. Now, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just, so even the job description is not going to be written as well or be as enticing if we don't have that foundation of the mission, vision, values for the organization.
Exactly. And you want to describe, because you want the best candidates. You want the top talent to be excited to come and work there. And so if you just put your standard cookie cutter job, which you can download these things all over, but what you want to do is you want it to reflect really what your organization is all about. And so that's the one thing. So ideally, I know you want to protect the workers and the people that are impacted by the work, the companies that you support, but you also want to make sure that what you're putting out there in that job posting or description is truly reflective. Like you're living that, you're walking the talk. So important to have that foundation and thinking about that and what you need. There are lots of resources we can share later. And then you get to the process of hiring. Yeah.
Sorry, is that something that you help organizations with in like writing their mission and vision statement and defining it?
It isn't something that I've done a lot, but there are other people that I partner with that do it. And it is a passion right now. So I'm doing a little bit more work in that. I find the ideal situation is your client already has their business strategy and they've already done that work. So you can align your people strategy with that. But if they haven't, like there's a lot of organizations that, put out facilitation and guides. Like one of them is called Barrett Values Center, which I love because it actually gets you to look at your individual values first. And then you try to then roll that out with the executive, and then with employees, you garner their feedback to then create consistent values because you don't want to work for a company that you're not aligned with those values. for the mission, right?
And I've really found that since we first began talking about this, that in looking at the organizations that have had the most success at implementing best practices that keep kids safe from sexual abuse, that it's far easier to implement these best practices when they have that foundation in place, that those mission and vision statements are solid, and they are making an effort to integrate it into all of the activities that they have in the organization. So I know for me, when I'm looking at organizations and assessing their readiness to keep kids safe from sexual abuse, that this has become sort of a key indicator that I look for now is, how strong is their mission and vision statement, and how true is it to their organization?
Yeah. And when you think about that, that work that you and those other companies are doing, it is such an important piece of body of work. Like we are the kids are our future, right? The future generations that we are, we need to heal. I mean, when you've talked a little bit in our conversations about just even the history in Canada, that the higher percentages in our Indigenous populations and what happened. I mean, all of that was in the media, recently. And we need to heal all of that. And we need to provide those future workplaces that we don't see this again. We don't see that in the Catholic Church. We don't see that. Like, I know lots of people that have been through this, not directly, but through others, when a lot of this surfaced. And it's like, how could this have been avoided? Which is what you're trying to get at is, we need to be able to screen people, because that is where there is vulnerable children. That's where a lot of the, I don't know if the perpetrator is the right word, but those are where, you'll find those people. I mean, how many times have we heard about teachers that have abused, and, all of the news, obviously. So how can we create a safe space so that doesn't happen again?
I love everything you're saying. I look at this as like, this is a best practice that organizations can put into place so that perpetrators are not going to want to work in those organizations, because they're going to see that in those organizations, people are paying attention, that, they're being watched closely, that opportunities are being minimized. So they're not going to want to be there. But I also see how, for parents and for caregivers who are sending children into these organizations, that they are going to be able to assess as well, that they can see that there's a strong mission and vision statement, that they can see that these screening processes are in place, so that we aren't assuming that children are being protected when they're in these organizations, which, I think from our past, and you talk about the Indigenous experience and the residential school system, which is being, seen in a new light right now. And oftentimes people are saying, how did this happen? And I think a lot of it is because we've assumed that people have the best interests of children in mind, and that we haven't been checking to make sure that they are following these procedures. So I love the mission and vision statement, and I love the idea of building that into a job description. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about the job description and how to build that in a way so that, that helps to become part of our screening process, that this is bringing in the right people and keeping out the wrong people.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of shift in the recruitment talent acquisition space, because historically, leaders, people want to fill those positions so quickly. So then you're rushing. And there's a shift now in the workplace where there was a lot more time spent, because it is a huge investment to hire. And you do want to retain, right? You want to attract the best and you want to retain them, because the turnover, it does cost, time to fill. If you're paying recruiters, or if you are spending all that time, your managers aren't out selling, they're actually trying to spend so much time. So you do, to me, this is such an important piece. This is one of the most important decisions you're going to make as a manager or hiring person. the decision on bringing who to bring in. So the key with, first of all, is evaluating what you need in your organization, especially if you're scaling. Maybe you've been in business for a long time, so you have very similar roles that that you have to fill. Maybe you can only keep people for 2 years or something like that. A lot of people do like to move and have their career growth. But what you want to do is look at what's your organization about? What are the skill sets and competencies you think you need within the organization? And when someone leaves, is it the same role that you're going to replace, or is it something different because the world shifted and you have to be agile all the time, as you know, as an organization? So once you do that, there is a whole bunch of processes that you can go through. There's a job evaluation process. There's compensation benchmarking to make sure it's the right role before you're posting, because once you start talking to people, they're going to want to know what's the salary. Now, in a lot of the companies, the smaller obviously the larger companies have the resources to be able to do this. And so when you're in these smaller companies, what happens is you may not have that HR person, so an office manager or the leaders are doing this off the side, right? So take the time to take the pause. What are the roles we need? You can always fill out a questionnaire for existing employees to kind of gauge what is their day-to-day like. But really, if you go on Indeed or LinkedIn or those other job boards, you'll see you maybe look up some to see how they describe it. So they always contain, what's our company about, but what are the key skill sets required, and what are the main roles and responsibilities. And it doesn't have to be that like minutia. I think people get mixed up with a job description and a posting. Like a posting's more at a high level. What are the key responsibilities? What are those competencies and like, for example, do you have to have a minimum education requirement? Do you have to have 5 years of experience in the industry? Are you leading people? So you have to think about those core things and put those in. But then you also want to give that descriptor, what's it like to work here? Is it fun? Is it professional? Is it serious? That's where the description helps.
So can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean about the difference between job description and job posting?
Yeah, I find the companies I've worked with, what will happen is a lot of time, well, first of all, there's a lot of services out there where you can download templates. But I'm not a fan of using these other like cookie cutter things. You have to really know your organization and create something, more reflective of what it really is like to work there. But they're good guides sometimes. But basically, in a job description, you get into a lot more detail, and it's more internal. So you do want to have a little bit more detail about, for example, let's just take an accounting role. Are you actually doing payroll as well? Are you responsible for reconciliation of vacation tracking? Like you need to know that, because that's about accountability and who has that. With a job posting, you're going to look more at like the skill sets required, but those buckets of work at a higher level. So you might just say, payroll experience, or this designation in accounting, those types of things.
And so what have you seen, or can you talk a little bit about the risks of skipping that area? Like sometimes I see, especially in youth serving organizations, especially in summer when, staff start to drop off or they don't have the staff they need to fill for a week of camp, and suddenly your neighbor's teenage daughter seems like the perfect fit because she's not got any plans next week. Can you talk a little bit about what the risks are when we skip the steps of, having the job posting and the description and bringing people into the organization in a procedure kind of way?
Well, and that's really interesting because, one thing that, again, I take for granted because I know this stuff and I've done it for so long. but there's human rights implications with everything, right? So if you don't have fair hiring practices, or favoritism or nepotism, you are opening up yourself to potential human rights complaints. So in each of the provinces and territories and at the federal level, there is legislation that you can look up, and there's sometimes guidelines too. Many of the like commissions, like for example, the Ontario Human Rights Commissions, where I am, put out hiring guidelines on how to avoid human rights violations. So that is one of the areas that you have to be careful about. And also, so say you're your example, so you've got a camp and you have all the current camp counselors, and then all of a sudden you bring someone in, and then you find out that they're a relative of someone and they're paid more. Right there, you're creating potential pay equity issue, your potential, discrimination based on one of the prohibited grounds. So it could be race, age, gender, those types of things. And also, if you skip those processes, you don't know what you're getting. So did you do your checks? Like, are you skipping your police reference, your police checks? Those criminal record checks.
That's where for Priority Kids, that's where our emphasis always is that if we don't build a procedure for bringing people in and make sure that we follow it, then the chances of getting people who wouldn't pass that screening increase. But it's really interesting to hear some of the more like the legal aspect of it and the human rights aspect of it, which I find interesting because in our work of helping organizations to adopt best practices to keep kids safe, that it just seems to snowball into something where it helps the organization to build a strong foundation, and the organization itself becomes stronger and thrives by putting these in place. So it's really, I'm fascinated by the implications that you're talking about, because from my perspective, I see it all the time where organizations get into trouble with staff, and then it becomes a bit sloppy in bringing in replacements.
Well, and think about that. Let's walk that through for a second. If you hire that person without going through some of these checks and balances, and something happens, so someone is assaulted or bullied, or worst case scenario, sexual assault, that you're trying to help people understand that the damage that can cause to someone who, it's just, it just makes me so disheartened to even think about that, and so you're liable, you're going to get sued. And if you're a small company, that could probably put you under, because it could be tens of thousands, potentially it could be hundreds of thousands, depending on what the damage is to that individual, because there's civil suits as well, right? So not only are there human rights complaints, in fairness as far as like discrimination, but the worst case scenarios of someone actually being hurt. And there's media coverage, which is a reputational risk thing, but it's that financial risk as well, that it could be a private lawsuit that you have to settle or something like that, right? So, and especially if you're in the business of trying to make kids just have a great life, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a real tragedy when the result is the opposite.
And I see this very similar to, I've worked a lot in the area of, also sexual harassment complaints within organizations, right? And we briefly chatted, and I think on your website, you talk about the Me Too movement and all these things that have finally brought this to the open, because this has been going on for years. Like, I've been in the legal profession, they're not immune to it, right? And I think about sexism and just even comments in my own career. I'm pretty strong personality, but as a woman, I bet you, I don't know what the percentage is, but we've all been through something. I've been through something, like
Yeah.
in a profession, in relationships younger in high school, like, we're all exposed to it. Thankfully not as a child, but I know it was around me, right? And so to have that openness at least is helpful. But it's I can't stress the importance of taking the time up front to get these things in order. Once you know where to get the checks. My daughter's a volunteer and has been and has had to go through that in order to get a job. She's a lifeguard, also with her university as part of the peer mentoring program. They've had to go through these checks and balances. She just got a job this summer as in one of the vaccine clinics, which I was excited for her. And it was good to see that those volunteers, they had to go through that process, right?
And it's really great to hear you talking about like getting those things in place first, like the upfront work, which is how we're talking about, mission, vision, and job descriptions when what I wanted to know was about interviewing,
I know.
for reference checks, which we're not there yet, but that's okay. I think it's really great
Yeah.
to do this foundational work. I'm just wondering, do you have any experience or have you seen the benefits of putting this in place? Because my gut tells me that when organizations have this focus where, their jobs are described accurately, the postings are accurate, that they are going to be less likely to run into problems of not having the staff that they need, of being in a situation. Have you seen that? Have you seen the benefit to organizations who do this work?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the things, like, first of all, there's productivity. So it's quite, when you're spinning your wheels every time, oh my gosh, we have a job posting, where do we post it? What job boards do we even use? Like, where do we want to post it? Are there specific associations? You're wasting so much time. You're churning, you're sending emails, you're revising job descriptions, trying to put something together, figure out the process, who's doing it, who's responsible. So that's just on that part of it. But then also for the people that are in the workplace, if someone leaves, often what happens is like, okay, who's taking over what they do for this period of time? You feel that pain. All of a sudden you're busy, you're already have a full plate, and now you're getting pieces of someone else's work. And then role clarity, all those things that, like, the more that you have that's clear, and I know what my piece is, like, how does my work fit into that mission and vision and strategy that the organization has, and I'm clear on what my roles and responsibilities are, I'm going to stick around a little bit more too in an organization that it isn't like scattered and like this feels like what the heck is going on, and things get dumped on you day in and day out. So there's the process of the hiring, which be organized for, but just even that, what we call, if it's a big restructuring or something, it's different. They used to call them the survivors. It's like when there was like a big mass layoff, and it's like the survivors. Well, yeah, because now they got to get stuck with all the crap that they have to do. But for the smaller ones, like, I think it's taking that pause to get it right. And so we're going to get into that whole onboarding experience a little bit later. But so you've got this, then you start your hiring process, right? It's like, how do these candidates feel when they're going through this experience as well? Was the interview, was this hiring process amazing as well?
I love what you just said, taking that pause to get it right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's a really big piece that I see, is that organizations get themselves into such a rush, and then instead of pausing, being intentional, making sure that it's safe for kids, they sort of plow through to get their objectives for the organization accomplished, and then that's where I see
Yeah.
risky behaviors start to emerge.
Yeah. And I mean, depending on the types of companies you support, but I've always said too, it's like every employee is also an ambassador of the company, a future client potentially, or customer, depending on if you sell product, whatever you do. If it's a camp, like I'm going to send my kids there because it's been around for 20, 40 years and they're still doing a great job. And I remember my experience, and in working at that company, and I know that my kids will be safe there, right? So you just never know. So you always have to look at like every touch point, just like when you're thinking about customer journeys and client journeys, every employee touch point and every part of the experience impacts what they might say about your organization, right? So there's Glassdoor and there's all these other things. So like if you go on that, you can look up companies, and generally it's disgruntled employees that have left that post things, but it's insightful, right?
Yeah.
So you want it to be a really fun, exciting experience. I have one of my a marketing assistant that was working with me part-time, and she just got a full-time job. So she was telling me a little bit about all of her experience in the interviewing process and how many interviews she had and questions they asked and things like that. And I found it interesting. She said one of the interesting things was, so what would Helen, because I guess she mentioned my name and current manager or whatever, what would Helen say is one of your areas of development? So I thought that was, that's the other piece. We haven't even gone into that, getting into the interview process, but, having standard questions that align to what, you need for the role.
So is that where we are in the process? We've got mission and vision and value statements. We've got a great job description.
Yeah.
A good job posting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so before that, it's like, where do you post? So that would be before you get into screening and everything. So it's, where would you post? So some organizations, like there's some free services, the old ones were Workopolis, Monster. Now there's Indeed. There's so many new things like JobVite. There's association specific. So maybe if there is volunteer associations, they might post there. I think there's a few, I'm not familiar with that space as much, but in my quick search, there are, Canada Volunteerism, or if there's a provincial association where you could actually post. Sometimes it costs and sometimes it's free, right? So.
And you've talked with me about how where you post can be an important part of supporting diversity and inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And also, if you aren't thinking about this right now, you've been missing the news the last year and the world and what's going on, that, this commitment to underrepresented groups in the past, right? So there are associations out there, just look them up, that, they support bringing diversity into the workplace. So you can look for them. Again, you'd have to do your search. There's so much out there. It can be overwhelming when you think about it. If you're trying to do this and you don't have even one person that's your HR generalist or someone supporting you. So you want to look around, and sometimes people will advertise in in a publication or things like that, job specific. One example I would say is one of my clients was looking for an HR person. So full time, they realized they finally needed one, and I helped them with that, getting their first person. And so the HR Professional Association has a job board, right? So we paid for posting there for a certain period of time, and you're going to get the, probably the best candidates. There's other organizations and recruiting companies now that have been popping up that will help you find diverse candidates. So if you said, if you have boards, for example, that you've made a commitment to have a diverse board and you want your company to mirror that, and you've actually made an affirmative commitment, like 25% diverse, then you want to get these professionals that are plugged into that market and can help you find the right person.
So I want to touch on what you said about it becoming overwhelming, because I can certainly appreciate that as a person who advocates for the best practices to keep kids safe. And I can put together a nice little looking checklist with 6 marks on it, and that's all it is. But then here we are, an hour and a half into one of those. We're not quite at it there. We can go deep, and it can become very specific. I think that anyone, who's able to put some of the steps into place, it's a great start. But what do you recommend for small organizations who don't have an HR department, and don't want to get overwhelmed? How would you encourage them to?
So, and keeping in mind budgets, and we've spent about half an hour already, haven't we? So keeping in mind budgets. So Indeed is a free resource. There are paid. You can always in Indeed or LinkedIn, there's free versions. And then if you want to pay more, you can, to get more people with, this whole data analytics and things.
Is that for reaching?
Yeah, for reaching
employees?
out. Yeah. I mean, if you use some hashtags and also share on social, a lot of people are using social these days to kind of say, hey, we posted this great job. And that's where you can talk about the organization a lot. Like there's a lot of social recruiting now. But what you want to do is, spread, share that if you can. But what I would say is the most important thing is because budget is an issue, is, having that available, posting it for a certain period of time. Usually I recommend at least 10 business days, right? So you want to make sure there's enough time. And because after that, then you're screening, right? So when you're thinking about it, again, ideally you have this checklist. Okay, what are the key, we've got our description, so we know what the key competencies are. And so when you're ranking and you're going through resumes, you're also deciding, do you want a cover letter? Do you want a resume? Is there anything else? Do you want them to submit a 1-minute video about themselves? Like there's so much out there for those larger companies. They have the applicant tracking systems and they do analytics, and there's certain questions you can ask. So people are popped out. Small businesses can't do that. Like it's expensive. Like, let's be real, right? So you're going to want to just make sure you've got your criteria listed, right? So when someone's looking through that, they're saying, oh, they have this, like, here's the top 10 things. Do they have it? Do they have the right skill sets? Like sometimes you can scan in 5 minutes as an expert, right? And say, oh, why are they even sending it in? They don't even have any of the job skills and you're wasting my time, right? But so having that little criteria.
You're saying when an application comes in, when an organization is looking to hire somebody, that they already have it listed, sort of what specifically they're looking for in the application to move on to the next step with this.
Yeah, exactly. And I would recommend, like, I just did this project with another client. Now I partnered with another consulting firm because I haven't, for compensation benchmarking and doing job evaluation, because if you don't have job descriptions or you haven't looked at them in years, there's a whole process to go through. So if you can even just take that time and say, oh, we haven't updated so-and-so's job for like 5 years. Let's pull it out. Let's update it. And you could do that in a couple months. You could actually go through your whole organization. And then you've got that. And then you've got, okay, what are the key things? You've got your criteria. So if I am going to do this screening, it's going to just it's like everything we do in our business too. It's like that, creating that infrastructure. And then you've got a list of questions once you get into that next stage, right? So you've got, I've got the job descriptions, detailed. What do I do on a daily basis? All your ops stock. What's the job posting look like with the fun stuff and making it attractive for people to come in? Where am I posting? Where am I going to do that? How long am I going to keep this open? The language in your job posting, we talked about that. Then how am I weeding out people? How am I reviewing each resume, right? Because that can take
That's
a
the
long time.
criteria that has been
Yeah.
established.
Yeah, so you go through, create that little checklist for yourself, and then you're ready to say what's next. And that's when you're going to start screening.
All right.
So, yes, I know. Sorry.
No, it's great. I love it. I really love this stuff. I really do think that when we focus on keeping kids safe, that these kinds of organizational practices become part of the strategy. And so we get
Yeah.
stronger organizations for it.
Yeah. Now, one thing that is interesting in your type of clients where they're actually not doing some of these checks until the end, it's quite interesting, but I think that's because of the cost, right? So if you have to, who's paying for these checks? Like in some cases, those, I believe you have to pay for the police checks. Some of them are free, but the organization's paying. So they have to decide, is this worth the investment? Because if you have 100 applications for one role, you're not going to go in and invest and say, I'm going to have every single one before we've even met with them fill out these forms, right? You just want to narrow it down. So that's why it's, near the end of the process. But at this point, once the job posting is closed, so there's always a timeline. And then some people send it in late. You got to decide, you know what? I'm trying to keep to the process and fairness. Does anybody come in after that? Oh my gosh, we just got the best candidate, but it was 5 days later. Where did this person come from? Like those are where it becomes a little ethics and challenging. And like, you often, there's a lot of things that happen in the recruiting space that aren't always above board, but that's where there's, again, a little bit of risk. But what I recommend before you bring anyone in to interviews, you have someone doing screening. So you've narrowed it down to 6 to 8 people. I've done up to 12 because there was like amazing people, but I've done like a half an hour screen where I just get on the phone and I have a set list of like 5 or 6 questions. And sometimes you get into compensation because you see this amazing person who has so much experience and maybe too much, right? And that's where it gets tricky. It's like, well, they might have a reason why. So you need to do that initial screening because, for example, if you're posting and you think that the compensation is only going to be about 50 grand, $50,000, and you've got someone really, really I don't want to use the word overqualified, but like they have much more experience than what is needed. And you're wondering, wow, they'd be great, and why are they applying? Well, if you have a conversation with them and they have all the skill sets and they give you good reasons why they want to work because they're at the end of their career and now they just want to work for a company that has a better, vision, mission, and it's their last thing. They want to contribute. So they're okay to take a pay cut. Or you say, oh, I want 20 grand. I want like 70,000 instead of 50. Well, you can't send that person forward. So you do want to think about that. And you can ask some key questions there that might gauge, your expertise is like, what are some of the signs? What are some of those warning signs? Can you gauge any of that early on that they wouldn't be a good fit or that they're potentially risky, right?
So are you saying that you would, before you have this, like you call it a screening call, you've narrowed it down already? So just from that criteria list of applicants, you've picked your top 6, your top dozen, whatever you can handle. And now you're getting on the phone for that screening. And this is before you ask for a police record check and a child abuse registry form. You're doing a screening, and this is a screening almost to get to the interview. Is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell me more about the kinds of questions? Now, for me, I'm encouraging organizations to be looking for somebody who has the best interests of children in mind, somebody who's able to set boundaries, respect boundaries. But this is also where it can get into an area where we start to potentially ask questions that are inappropriate, or to have conversations going into an area where it's really not appropriate. Can you talk a little bit about like human rights and how we can do a screening that is effective without being harmful?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's important. I've heard so many stories and have had some experiences where, a hiring manager, has had a conversation with someone and says, "Oh, I'm not going to hire that person because, she just got married and then she's going to have kids next," right? It's like, okay. And you're asking about those, or you're making those statements. I mean, right there, that's like a no-no, right? Because you can't discriminate based on marital status or gender, and gender includes pregnancy, right? So there's tons of human rights law on that in cases. Now, where you are, I mean, I always, just some general questions you can ask is, number one is, have they done their homework on the company? It surprises me so many times that people haven't really done their due diligence, like they haven't gone on the website, they haven't checked things out and can really have a good conversation. It's like the first question I ask every single interview in the screening phase, before they even meet the hiring manager, before they even meet maybe the leader, like as the second interview. People don't want to hear about this. I'm just talking about 3 different interviews. It's pretty basic these days that people are going through a screening interview. They're going through the first set of interviews, sometimes panels, sometimes at least 2 people usually, and then a third with some other decision makers and stakeholders. So you can kind of figure out whether the relationship is good and whether they're consistent throughout. So in the first set, if you're wanting to flag out, you do kind of get ask them again about, well, why this role? What interests you? How does your background align? What are the key things that you think you can give? How would people describe you? So what are 3 words or phrases that someone would describe you? Sometimes you ask them how you would describe yourself, and then when you get to a manager reference, you see if it aligns. There's things you can do. You want to, again, knowing your mission, vision, and values, you can ask questions. People also do personality tests. Like there's a lot of, again, sophisticated ways to do. There's not a ton of free resources, but there are some free assessments. But I'm not a huge fan. I like some of them, but I feel like conversation is how you're going to really get to know people.
And so again, this reinforces that having those mission and vision statements, that you're really looking for alignment, that this person can reflect and uphold your values.
Yeah.
And then the job description, and you're really looking for compatibility with this specific job. So how many questions would you typically have prepared for this first screening interview?
The first screening, I usually have no more than 6, like around 6 questions. Yeah, at the most. And it's a quick half an hour, like you can have a real quick discussion, right? You can, get at that. You're kind of validating what's in the resume as well. And then just really trying to understand why they want the job more than anything. You can always ask, like if in this world of yours, the clients you support, if relationships are important, again, you're looking at, well, what are the key things that would really make or break a decision to hire this person? So how they deal with conflict, that would probably be something a lot. What is your approach? Can you give us an example, right? So you're doing, like, some of this would happen. Some people skip this, like maybe they've looked at the resumes and they only had 5 good people and they're just going to bring 5 in. I mean, I try to narrow it down to like no more than 4 ideally. And then, you can have a short list of 2 if you want to, if you're not quite sure. Sometimes it's up to 5 because it's a long process, right? To have,
You would narrow it down to 2 for the final interview?
yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
good for you. That's a great way to do it.
Well, yeah. So you've gone through. So if you have like up to, as I said, this last one, I seriously talked to 10 or 12 people just because as I went through them, I'm like, okay, they're, we can't afford them. They make more than the executives, right? It's like, so, but
And do you
then
have
you want to present to the next phase, right? You want to present the strongest candidates, and you don't want, each of those interviews is going to be at least an hour.
so then my question is, how do you judge, or how do you base that first screening interview? What's the criteria that you use to assess who gets to move on and who doesn't get to move on? And how can organizations do that in a way that's fair and ethical?
Yeah, well, you want to before, so for every stage, this is consistent for every stage, just so you know. So you've got your questions ahead of time, and you can have a committee that deals with those. Like again, for each role, eventually you're going to have a database because you can, keep those questions and say, oh, these are great ones that we've used for this role. Let's, and you share that, right? Then there's how are you rating? You always want to say, okay, well, what's an excellent answer? Like, even if it's just point form, what is a 1 out of, like if 5 is excellent, what does a 5 answer look like? What are the things I'm looking for? So for an example about research about the company, like, did they know what our company is all about? Were they able to, like, did they do some due diligence? Could they articulate it? I had one situation once where I did the screening, and it was good. And then I brought the person in for the next round of interviews. So it was myself and the person that was leaving, because it was all good. And she, was a group, she was going to help screen because she was leaving on good terms. She went back to Australia. So it was a good situation. And we're sitting there and we couldn't figure out, it was such a disconnect in what she was talking about. And then we realized there was 2 companies with the same initials, like the acronym, 2 completely different workplaces and the work they did. And she got them mixed up, which is so weird because the job description has the full name of it. And it just didn't come out in the first time. So even I can make, like, what did I do? What did I ask that I didn't pick it up? Or did I miss that question or wanted to save it for the next one? So sometimes it is trial and error. But yeah, so then you want to say, what is that? And if they haven't done that, then they're getting a 1. You may not even want to keep asking questions, but you'll quickly do that. But for things like if they, and I'm going to tell you something, Angela, lately I've been doing some interviews with new grads for co-op placements for some of my clients, and communication skills is not very strong. And I had a young woman who kept saying, I don't know. I'm like, I was, right away, it's again, is communication skills a huge part of that role and the criteria? So you may even have a separate category that says, in addition to how they answer the questions from a technical perspective or the content, how did they communicate? Were they are concise? Did they ramble? Like you could have another little, I'm going to mark that at a 5 as well. So you have to kind of think up front how you're going to do that. And we're not meant to be like completely like, oh my gosh, this is every minutia, rating all of this, because that sounds overwhelming, but it's at least a process that says, I'm comparing apples to apples, right? I'm not saying, oh, this person was just a great chatter and let's bring them in,
And so what is the difference that this makes for an organization from a legal perspective? Like if somebody went through an application process and came out and said, I think that I was excluded for unfair reasons, what does
Mhm.
a structure like this do for that organization to defend themselves?
Exactly. I mean, when you think about it, if you don't have this documents, like so your notes or whatever kept somewhere, it's your word against others, right? And so that individual, what do you have to defend the allegations? Um, so obviously, if you don't have a structure where, hey, here's the list of questions we asked, here's our notes, here's how we've had a discussion on how we were rating. I just went through this recently for one of the hires, and it was great because even at the third panel interview, I had senior executives and they were keeping notes and they were ranking, right? So it was good because they liked going through the process. And they like in that case, we ended up with top three because we were sure. And it was consistent in who was 1, 2, 3, right? In how they answered and some of that. And we talked about communication skills as a criteria. But so an example, if you just had that one we talked about earlier, which just I need this person. I haven't even put a posting in. I'm going to bring this person in. Oh, I'm going to do a posting and I brought 3 people in and I'm having a chat, no set questions. And this woman mentions I have a family and I have a 2-year-old at home and they're chatting and there's some kind of inkling that this is why I didn't get the job. So how do you protect yourself? How do you defend? It's going to be a credibility thing, but if you don't have any documentation, now with this, there's also how long you keep all this stuff, right?
Oh my
So
gosh, you're reading my mind. That was my next question, but I just want to say I really love this. Like for the work that we do, I advocate for do the right thing is number 1, and like almost tied is show that you're doing the right thing.
amazing.
And I
And
yeah,
yeah,
so I love
HR's
this.
motto.
And
That's our
and I
motto.
yeah,
Do
it's a
the
great
right thing. Well, it has been mine. It's so funny because for years, and when I worked at CIBC, and that was when I was heading up like the HR team that did like investigations and things like that, and discrimination complaints, external and internal. And we always said we have to do the right thing. You have to do the right thing. And so, and this is where it's you never know like what a conversation could turn into.
so
And
in doing the right thing, what is the right thing to do with these notes that people are
mhm.
taking on this first screening interview?
Yeah, and I mean, what a lot of what I'm talking about with the first screening applies to those other, you can decide, are you only having the one interview or you're going to bring 3 people in and decide after that? Do you want, do you want to only then present the final candidate to some senior managers so that you're good and you validate? I mean, you can try to do this in a quick process, right? You could have one set of interviews this week, a lineup the next one the next week. So it's still gonna take some time. You're gonna have like a month or so or 2, sometimes 2 months without a person in the role. But if you had all this done ahead of time and you're not scrambling, you just go, okay, well, we could actually do one day of screening, the pre-screening. Next, 2 days later, we've already blocked the time with who's interviewing. You know who's interviewing. You've created all the questions ahead of time. And then you have that next date, the next week you've got hours, but and you're just having to make sure the person's available, but you've got the key interviewers set up and block time. So all of that, it's just organization. Now with human rights, there are limitation periods. So an employer, a candidate or a potential employee can only bring it within a certain period. So if you're doing hiring, a lot of times they say keep it at least a year after the hiring process. You have to look at what the limitation period is. So if the hiring process happened today, And the limitation period is you can only bring a human rights complaint a year later, and you can't after that, or 2 years later. That's the period of time that you will keep that record. And it has to be separate. So, keep that in separate files, right? Keep it,
When you
because if
say
you bring it,
separate, do you mean like locked and away from the regular like internal documents of the organization?
yeah. So, I mean, retention of documents is a whole different hour and a half or hour,
That's our next
because
installment.
there's different periods of times. Like, think about payroll records and taxes and everything. There's like 6-7 years that you're keeping that stuff, right? And then with employees, you keep their files for years, because again, they may not bring a suit if they were going to bring one for years later. So there's all this, there are retention rules and laws around that. I don't have that in the top of my head at all. But that's where it's important to know, because there's like electronic, but there's hard copies as well. Most people are keeping electronics. But why I say keep the hiring file separate is that if you bring one of those people in as an employee, you're not going to put all those notes in their employee file, right? They're not going to see what the interviewers were writing down and things like that. So just keep that separately, so then you can flag and log again. Back to our processes is like, what's your process to archive, retain, destroy documents? There's a whole, privacy legislation. There's all kinds of things. So so it's important to keep that. What I do is I ask the managers to keep it, or you can collect it and put it in a separate, like HR could hold all the notes, either scanned or electronic, or hard copy.
My question then is, does this apply? Is this rule enforced for even like nonprofit community organizations? If people are volunteering for small community groups, do they still need to keep these documents and store them?
Wow, when you think about that, because volunteers could come and go. But yeah, you know what? It's your volunteers are akin to employees, they're just not getting paid, right? So same processes. I think about, like, there's an organization, the Canadian Payroll Association, I used to do work with years ago. I used to sit on some government boards when I was at ADP Canada, which was a company that moved from payroll to human resources services and technology. And I helped build out some of their offers, which was pretty exciting. And the Canadian Payroll Association. So the other thing, we didn't, this is not even part of the hiring process, it's more onboarding. Maybe we'll book another meeting for all of that. But they actually have all their volunteers they have to do certain training that's mandatory and sign code of conducts, and they keep all of that on file per whatever regulations there are, because a volunteer could have a complaint. A volunteer, as you're trying to protect the youth that the company's supporting, but the people that are working also. Like, if you think about bullying, safety in the workplace, harassment, all of that too, a volunteer could have a complaint. So you need those records as well, right? So it could be a lot, especially in those. And I would say, I'm not an expert in that area, but I would say make sure you're talking to, you're looking that up. You're actually, if you're provincially regulated and only working in Nova Scotia, understand what the law is as far as retention of documents for nonprofit or for-profit or whatever type of organization you are.
Yeah, I just love the way that HR sort of blends so nicely with the work of keeping kids safe, because it just shows like we have to have strong organizations, and if the organizations are not able to ensure that the adults in the organizations are treating each other respectfully and that that's a safe space, then the chances of those adults providing safety for children just goes down. So again, this strong foundation just
Absolutely.
makes it so much more likely that we're going to be able to keep kids safe.
Yeah, and think about that. I mean, the whole intent of people strategy and having a great workplace is that um, you're excited to come to work, and everything is contagious, right? Like emotional contagion is a known thing, that negativity spreads, but so does positivity, right? And it's so if you see respectful behaviors, so there's, I mean, we're not even getting into that other workplace stuff, but it's all about having respect, psychological safety, creating a space that is safe in many aspects, and you feel like you can be yourself and show up, and that you can have meaningful conversations with people. And then, the trickle effect, those people that you are contributing to or serving, whatever language you want to choose there, is, they're going to see it, right? And so, it saddens me that there's so much risk in this area still, that I have a mentee who, her and her partner started a Muay Thai organization, and it's a lot of kids, right? So they have camps, and they have like the lessons, and they're just a beautiful family. And so they're creating this, the people they bring in, because they're supporting these youth programs. And so often they'll call me about some of their employee relations issues, right? And it's all about treating people well, right? And it's treating them human first. And I know international human rights, like there's so much more to do in the world, and that it's just so sad that the future generations are still, they're still vulnerable, and there's still those situations where they're being abused in many different ways. And so
But
let's get it right,
yeah, exactly.
take the
I mean,
time.
let's do it right. And I think that this is, like you say, about the emotional contagion. When we have strong foundations in these organizations, and Priority Kids works with organizations more than we work with parents and caregivers, but organizations are made up of parents and caregivers. And when organizations are demonstrating these good habits and good behaviors, it trickles out, and the other adults in the community learn from them. So I think it's a
Yeah,
beautiful way to start modeling good, healthy relationships, so that we can see them happen
yeah.
in other areas as well.
And the parents and caregivers can be advocates, right? So like I think about the school, my son's school, he's going into high school now, but there were lots of parent volunteers, and there's the parent council, and like the influence you can make, like it's about safety, right? It's about, there's like numbers issues when it's overcrowded or whatever. I mean, COVID, but that's different. But if you're coming into pizza lunch, what's the protocols? Are you screening? And those are organizations that are government funded and should have the means to ensure that that's happening. And I'm guessing it's not in many cases.
I see it often that those things are not happening. And so again, this is where, even if somebody is listening to this today and is not involved in the youth serving organization, knowing this information is so important, because then we know what we're looking for. So you ask at the school,
Mhm.
if you're going in to volunteer, ask what kind of criteria do you have? And if the school says nothing, you're welcome to come in for
Mhm.
lunch. It seems easy, but that also means it's easy for anybody. And that's
Yeah.
not what we want. We want to make sure that people
Yeah.
who are serving around children are there with the best of
Yeah.
intentions. So, okay, we've been through like the first screening. We got the first screening done. We've narrowed down the list. I love the description you have of like knowing ahead of time what the questions are, knowing ahead of time what kinds of answers you're looking for. I think that's such an important piece for people to know that we should be doing this, that we can put these things in place. So then we get to, you do the police record check and child abuse registry for youth serving organizations. Could be different across the country. I hear, like you've described, people having to pay for it. Here in Nova Scotia, if you're volunteering, you can get it done for free from the RCMP in most situations. Sometimes it costs 10 bucks, 15 bucks. And I understand that sometimes the organization pays for it, sometimes the volunteer or the employee pays for it. But regardless, once they get it, what should the organization do with those documents that they are seeing? Should they store them? Do they keep them on file? And the big question, what do you do if something shows up? And how do you evaluate how to respond if an employee or a potential employee has a criminal record of some sort? Do you automatically dismiss them from your consideration?
Yeah. Well, and that's where, again, you need to decide those things up front. So when I was at CIBC, again, we had the benefit of there's like security, like corporate security was an area, risk management, HR. We had a committee that would look at things, because in that case, a lot of times it was more, in addition to criminal reference checks, I mean, you're dealing with money a lot of times in the roles where you're dealing with it. And was there anything like theft or anything like that, right? So you do need to, or was it something that happened like 25 years ago? Well, they probably could have got a pardon or had it expunged, so you would have never seen it anyway. And again, depending on what it is. So in that case, they'd be focusing on some of that type, right? But then it's like, wow, what if the 25 years ago was like a misdemeanor, is it just parking violations, or is it an assault or something? Like, do you still want? So you have to decide, okay, up front, what are we prepared? If we're saying no criminal record at all, then you got your decision criteria, right? Or we're saying we can't have this thing. Like, if someone was drinking in public, when they were a dumb teenager, like 19 or whatever, if that was legal age, whatever it was, right? Like, do you forgive something like that? Because it could be someone that's 50 now that has learned their lesson. There's nothing else, right? So I think it's important to have those conversations up front. But if you want a clean record only, that's easier, right? Because you can just say, you know what, we're only doing clean record. And if that person has something, we're going to the next. So you can see how having that upfront dialogue and conversation about what are you prepared to accept, what risk. And if it's, we want zero tolerance, we don't want any kind of record, then you've got an easier decision. And then so I think that that's important to kind of know, or you have a committee picked that if something comes up, those three people are designated, different viewpoints, you have to have an odd number because it's almost like voting, but then you have that process again that you'd hop on a 15-minute call, you look at it and you've said yes or no.
I really like the idea of a committee helping to make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of committees and engaging employees in decision making, focus groups, but even in like policy review, if you can get a draft, but then bring in viewpoints, like we're doing some return to office things right now, and we'll share that. We'll do a little survey on what are their thoughts on, how many days a week do they want to return, and you may not be able to get 100% what you want for each individual, but you've engaged and you have feedback, right? So it's a good idea to have other people involved.
I just want to share that I was working with a principal, and there was some volunteers who were working with sports teams, and complaints got brought forward. And through the process, I learned that the principal was the singular decider for all of the sports leaders. And I said, and he didn't recognize it as a risk, but I thought, wouldn't it be nicer for him to be on a committee of people that made that choice?
Yeah.
So that he's not the only one sitting there saying, oops, I let somebody who is a poor quality be with these
Yeah.
children.
And you've got that accountability, right? But it would be, yeah, it just strengthens the process to have others involved, right? One in like an individual, you know, different than like approving finance records or something where the CFO has to be you know, or the CEO is the final approver or something, right? You can have but it's important to especially have different viewpoints, right? And it's good discussions, right? Sometimes about it kind of brings you back to values and behaviors of like, well, wait a minute, like, what are we going to tolerate, or what do we want our environment to be? Do we want to let something slip through or not? So yeah, so when you get to that point of getting those references, and again, keeping those in a separate folder, you would not put that, if you hire that person, you're not going to put that in their file, but you need a record of, did you do a record check?
So this is my question. Do you keep those documents? Do you keep the letter that they get that says they're not on the child abuse registry form, the police record check stamped by the police, the
Yeah.
RCMP, whatever it is? Do you keep those on file in your organization?
Yeah. So what you have a separate folder. It's the recruitment folder. It doesn't go into that employee's file, right? And again, you have to determine who has access. Where is it locked? Where is it maintained? It's usually, if you have an HR person, likely in the HR recruitment folders versus, and then like even who sees it? Does the hiring manager even see it, or is it just a designated person? If you don't have HR, who's responsible for maintaining that? Is it the office manager? Is it the executive director or the lead? Make that determination, and only they have access. So it's all about privacy and information, right? So it's important to have, again, because what if you got a complaint, right?
So it almost seems like every answer is have it mapped out ahead of time.
I know.
Really, and if you're following what's been mapped out, then that in itself creates a sense of safety and structure for you in the organization.
Yeah, and I would say once you get your process and all your documents, and you have like, hey, here's our guide on how we hire, you could put a little thing together, and then annually you'd review it. Okay, let's get some feedback. What worked? What didn't work? What questions did we like? Let's kind of review this hiring guide. I had a new executive for one of my clients ask me, do we have a hiring guide for this position? Again, I only supported them a couple days a week. And she said, I'm thinking not. I said, on the list, but because they've never had one, they've operated forever. But so, we revamped the job, we posted it, we did all the interview questions, but it's like, okay, well now, let's create this so that you don't have to spin the wheels next time, right? So there's a lot involved.
All I wanted to know was, what do I do in my reference check? And we didn't even get there in an hour and a half. But I think that, everything you've shared has gone, for me, from being like, oh, this is a lot of detail that feels almost overwhelming, to actually it's not that difficult. It's just following the steps, mission and vision, job description, job posting, have your criteria, do the screening, get people in. So really, by the time you get to reference checks, it's really just kind of the same.
Yeah.
Have it planned.
Yeah.
And
reference.
criteria.
Yeah, exactly. And reference checks the same thing, that because there's different types, as you know, you're also going to be talking to prior managers or whoever their references are, and again, set questions for them, right? And then those other process ones where you do have to get the criminal reference check, sometimes there is a credit check, in very rare cases, like if there's financial situation, because you have to be careful there too, that you're not discriminating based on someone's social origin, or a couple of provinces have something there. There's not a lot of protection there. There's a couple provinces that actually talk about it. Like if you're on welfare and you found out something, like, are you discriminating against that person, right? So again, keeping all of that separate, but a process for those reference checks as well. And it makes most of the reference checks where you're talking about to a manager, they're usually not going to give you someone that's going to give a crappy one, but you never know. So again, looking for inconsistencies, right? As far as what they said in the interviews versus what this manager's saying. You don't always get a ton of red flags, like it's rare, but those other ones are important. And it's, what process, what stage, the last thing I wanted to say was at what stage are you getting those references? You're putting out an offer because you don't want to lose that candidate. So you might put out the offer and say it's subject to or conditional upon satisfactory references, including XYZ. And then that way you can get the offer to them. They're looking at it, you can start the references. And so that hopefully that's just a few days process to then have it signed off. And then you can send your code of conduct and all those things that we could talk about another time that they also need.
So you're saying basically do the screening, do the selection process, make the offer on condition, and that's when they can get their police record check, child abuse registry check, and you can confirm with their references that it is in alignment with what you've discovered so far about the person.
Yeah.
And then boom, they're entered into your wonderful organization that's full of best practices, and the world has become a better place. I love it.
They're so excited and everybody's excited. And then you deal with an amazing onboarding experience and how they're welcomed into the organization.
And they never
the welcome kit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. And they're really in an environment that they feel comfortable as well, the employees, and that that's the right person that's going to also help protect those children, right? So works out.
Helen, thank you so much for this. We've gotten so much information out, and this is, I think, just really critical information for building the strong organizations we need to keep kids safe. So thank you for sharing your expertise. If people were looking, if they have an organization and they're looking for some support, maybe they don't have an HR department, is there a way that you can provide support to organizations to help them sort of build out these processes and implement them?
Absolutely. So I'm at helen@lifeworkswell.ca. That's my email. I have a website, lifeworkswell.ca as well. And I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and everything, Helen Patterson. And, there's a lot of resources even on my website in different areas of HR. But happy to help build any of these processes, do an assessment of an organization. I'm happy to share with you, Angela, again, I'll put a little list together of some resources that I've come across that are free that people can check out if they, budget is a constraint. But keep in mind that you want it to reflect your own organization, but there's some good websites out there that they can get some more information as well. So I'll share that with you. I'll put a little list together for you that you can send out to your list, and I'm happy to do that. So I just love chatting with you, and I just love what you're doing, and I really appreciate you opening this up to me too. I think it's a good reminder of the right way of doing things and how to kind of keep moving forward to just make workplaces and the world a better place,
Right? One person at a time, we can do it. And so, and if you're an organization and you are putting best practices into place and you see room to strengthen, enrich your child protection practices, I encourage you to visit our website, prioritykids.ca/webinar. We have a free monthly webinar where we go over the best practices. This has been a deep dive into one of those best practices, but there are other best practices that you can implement and I encourage you to come and learn more about them. prioritykids.ca/webinar. Thank you for being here today, for listening, and for all that you do in your organizations to implement these great practices, to implement a great culture to keep kids safe. Thank you.
Thanks.